Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. The man that you are hearing in the host chair today is Evan Buck, and even though I say I'm in the host chair, I will say I'm probably going to be delegating quite a few of those duties to my co-host today. We're taking the two-seater edition of the Times Mobile out for a spin, and so I will allow today's co-host to introduce himself.
Hi,
What do you have to say? Dang it. I was about to say, what do you have to say to the fine people?
Don't worry. Hi, good people. This is Chris Coppola. I do want to go ahead and let everybody know this is not my long-threatened one-man show of the plot against America. When he did say I'm taking a lot of that's not this. So please get to the episode.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I wasn't actually thinking about that, but now that you mention it, I'm like, oh, well, that's part of where this episode can eventually take us. But unfortunately, dear listeners, for those of you who have been waiting for Chris's long-threatened / promised, one-man episode rant about the plot against America, that unfortunately will have to wait for another day. But we will hopefully be able to touch upon those themes as this episode develops. So today is the third part in our series where we have been taking a look at the possibilities of how the world would look different with a Nicaragua Canal happening in the late 1800s, early 1900s, as opposed to our timeline's Panama Canal. And so, Chris, do you want to walk us through what we have developed so far and how we're going to progress from here?
Sure. So, quick recap. Basically, last episode, what we basically had was the Nicaraguan Canal attracting the attention of Germany in the lead up to the First World War. Well, in the lead up to American entry into the First World War. Basically, Germany tries to play around with the locks at the Nicaraguan Canal. It kind of changes the outcome of the American presidential election. Charles Evans Hughes is elected. Actually, by the way, German sabotage got some really good comments from people in the Discord talking about, right?
I remember.
Yeah. So United States enters World War I. Timeline almost the same as in ours, but focus-wise, it was very different because basically the U.S. sets out to basically pacify Nicaragua to kind of shore that up before we even think about Europe. And Europe plays out similarly a little bit to the way it did in our timeline. I wish more people would have talked about the Kaiserschlacht.
I know. Yeah, that was something that I was very interested in seeing people think and talk about, because that, even though it's a subliminal change, it's a pretty important one, I would say.
Also, more the connection between the Kaiserschlacht and like the Ardennes offensive, because they are so similar when you actually think about it that way.
Right.
Germany still loses. Germany ceases to exist, basically because there's no United States Wilson at the Versailles Conference. Germany gets split between kind of basically they their time machine, go back 40-ish years and undo German unification. You have the North German Confederation, which is largely Prussia. They separate out Bavaria. Austria-Hungary stays in existence. Bavaria becomes kind of a satellite of Austria-Hungary. I promise I'm trying to be quick about this. Um,
Austria-Hungary still exists, by the way. It doesn't get broken up like in our timeline.
correct. And we kind of suggested it would almost go where Franz Ferdinand wanted, which was like the United States of Middle Europa or Austria-Hungary, like
Basically,
somewhere
the Balkan Empire.
right.
Yeah, which would totally not going to be problematic at all.
Right. Absolutely not. And by the way, we promised ourselves. I said a couple of times in part 2 of this, I promise I'm going to get us back to Nicaragua.
Right. I mentioned that, I remember as well. Or like, we got to get back to what actually kicked off this whole series.
And just putting that out there, we did say this is going to be a Western Hemispheric episode. So that's where we were last time. Now we're going to kind of shift back to the Western Hemisphere. We did say some of the things that are about to happen here are going to be so interesting. We probably want to revisit Europe because as anybody who was like, if you were to, if we had like a wheel of every A Fork in Time episode and spun it, the chances are it will relate to 1930s Europe.
Yes.
Very closely.
Yes. All roads lead back to 1930s Europe eventually.
So that's where we were. Now let's go back to what's happening in Nicaragua. I think the United States is still there. Basically thinking about what's going on. It's very easy for Germany to ship a couple of crates of rifles to somebody who wants to cause trouble for the United States. And after Germany surrenders, those rifles are still down there in Nicaragua. And I think the United States is still fighting, not with the same number, but an extended counterinsurgency against anti-imperial people in Nicaragua. Is that kind of fair?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a good way of thinking about it is there's, the tweet is going to be sent instead of Mexico to Nicaragua. And it's not just going to be a tweet. It's going to actually be some sort of material support. In the United States, like in our alternate timeline, as we discussed in the last episode, they're going to be sending more material support to, I guess, we could deem the allies, Britain, France, in World War I, but not be as directly involved because there's going to be more of this emphasis on shoring up the counterinsurgency in Nicaragua. So a lot of the same factors that led to what we're about to talk about in our timelines in Nicaragua are going to still be there. But in fact, I would say they'll be even more present. There'll be an even greater, order of magnitude of these sorts of events that we're about to describe.
So there is one name that, you know what? No, there are two names that define by the way, everything I'm talking about is our timeline, like actual history.
Yeah. Chris and I discussed, Chris literally asked me, okay, Evan, how much detail do I give about Nicaraguan history in our timeline? And well, I'll see if he holds to my suggestion, but it's like, we can go very granular on this if we want to, because it is important to set up what's about to happen in the alternate timeline. But this is all stuff, I'm going to say, that is by and large not discussed very much in American history classes.
This is why the refrain of this entire arc has been, we're getting back to Nicaragua.
We're getting back to Nicaragua.
Because we want to do it, but it's like
it's tough
so
because
much about everywhere.
Right. The rather large change from Panama to Nicaragua does have ripple effects on the pond of so many things that we as Americans are incredibly familiar with. But it also is something that we do have to come back to home and, discuss what happens in the alternate Nicaragua, because, it does have big impacts there as well. So, take it away from here, Chris.
First person is You know what? The first name is Sandino. Augusto Sandino. He was a guerrilla leader in Nicaragua in our timeline that actually wound up declaring war on the United States, fighting the guerrilla war against the United States in Nicaragua during most of the 1920s. There was a peace deal. He was betrayed by the head of the National Guard, a man named Anastasio Somoza.
The Nicaraguan National Guard.
Correct.
Yeah.
Nicaraguan National Guard.
And Sandino didn't like that because he was like, hey, the National Guard is based upon, like, it's a vestige of United States imperialism, right? So that's, from my understanding, a main reason why he was betrayed is because he wanted to get rid of them.
Yes. And Somoza, not long after assassinating Sandino, took over as a military dictator. His son succeeds him as a military dictator, gets overthrown in 1979 by a group called the Sandino National Liberation Front. You have probably heard of them as the
Sandinistas. Yep.
This is who the Sandinistas are named after. If you get into, this is the only time I'm going to use this word, the Contras.
Yeah.
I promise.
Gosh, I wish we could speed up the timeline.
It sets up so much of this.
It sets up so much.
Literally.
Well, and we also noted, sorry to interrupt here, but the modern president still of Nicaragua comes from this faction, Daniel Ortega.
He was the leader of the
Sandinistas.
In 1979, there's pictures of him going to meet Jimmy Carter.
Yep.
As the military commander of the Sandinistas. He's the president today.
Yeah. Crazy stuff.
And really, but I think the biggest thing to kind of echo what Evan was saying earlier, 50 years later, a group of guerrillas in Latin America, in Nicaragua, took the name of Augusto Sandino. A lot of people do not know who Sandino is here. They know him there.
Oh,
his name means a lot.
They have long memories in Latin America in particular. This is something I think I mentioned in the first episode of this arc, and it's something I'll mention here as well. Is these people who like fought against the speak softly and carry a big stick sort of American imperialism that was going on in Latin America. They're remembered as and revered as national heroes in a lot of these countries. We barely ever, if we even do, hear about them in American history classes.
Right.
So that's a big difference.
So let's go back to Nicaragua in the 1920s.
Yep.
Sandino is going to become important as a guerrilla leader. I think the big thing here is the U.S. is going to focus on Nicaragua more, but it may not have any more success.
Well, I mean, I would say the success is probably going to be more limited to, and I would say the focus is going to be like I would say initially it's going to be, okay, shoot, we have to like prevent this political insurgency and everything. But because we have a big, very important, vital economic artery there in the form of the Nicaraguan Canal, I think the difference in approach is probably eventually going to be, okay, let's focus our resources on preserving our access and preserving the canal itself and doing what we can to not tick off Sandino. I kind of think that's what eventually the approach is going to be.
Not tick off Sandino?
Well, I mean, and I don't know, maybe you have a different way of seeing it, but my way of seeing it is because there is this shipping lane, in Nicaragua, we're still going to want to have access to it. It's still very vital, still very important. In our timeline, we could essentially just kind of, eventually pull out and be like, hey, we got bigger fish to fry. We have other things we need to be involved with. In the alternate timeline, we're going to have a little more resources invested in that in the Western Hemisphere. And initially it'll be like, yeah, we want to keep Sandino, out of power or, blunt his influence.
Mm-hmm.
But because the canal is there, it's kind of like, and this maybe isn't the greatest historical parallel, but it just popped into my head. It's like what happened in Venezuela with like the nationalization of the oil industry, and kind of the approach there is, okay, we want to be able to still operate to a certain extent. I think the only company that was able to operate there American company anyway, that could operate there for a while was ExxonMobil, if I remember correctly. Because like once the oil industry was nationalized, like that basically left a lot of private companies, private enterprises in the dust. But, so I don't know. I don't know if that's the best historical parallel to what I'm trying to describe here, but like once the writing's on the wall, I would say, like once the United States sees, okay, there's enough support for Sandino and his forces to where we either risk further escalation, and that risks the shipping routes, that risks the canal. Let's just cry uncle. Let's just say, okay, we'll work with you, but we still want to have access, or we still want to control. And Chris, maybe you can talk about how this pans out, how this looks, practically speaking. But yeah, we're still going to definitely want to have, as long as we have our toehold in the canal, we're good. We're cool. You can do whatever you want.
I actually think, one, I don't think that Sandino is going to be okay with like a swath in the middle of Nicaragua being controlled by the United States.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And I love that you actually said Nicaragua you said Venezuela, because we kind of solved that another way recently.
I was somewhat trying to avoid that, but yes.
Not exactly a great example to use of us knuckling under and just accepting a leader we didn't like.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think that's important. Because I think what would happen is kind of what wound up happening, only we cut out a middleman. In other words, we cut out the political leader that Somoza wound up overthrowing, because at one point there was kind of an election, and Sandino was kind of brought back into Nicaragua, recognized and allowed to participate. I don't think that happens. I think I think I can use the word once. I think I can string it together. The word is Nicaraguazation. I think the United States tries to occupy Nicaragua, tries to get actually kind of what we did in our timeline, which is send Marine detachments out into the jungle. By the way, the lessons learned there are kind of why are implemented in World War II in kind of a doctrinal standpoint, and they really are used in the South Pacific. That's kind of where the Marines learned to fight, in the jungles.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, the United States keeps trying this and realizes, kind of like we did the other time the Marines tried to fight in the jungle in Southeast Asia, the solution was, hey, let's hand over the fight to people around here. That let's pick a winner. We're gonna, you're now our winner, Somoza. We're gonna supply you, and we're slowly going to withdraw and stand up your people to do it.
Yes. And
without anyone else distracting us, without anyone helping the Sandinistas in this timeline, I think they can actually do it, because the U.S. opens up its coffers to the Somoza forces, and I think they're able to pacify Nicaragua. Is that fair to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. Like the main people who would be supporting the insurgency at this point, I mean, as we established in the alternate timeline, that would be Germany. And they're now split into two states,
Right.
and so I think they're without substantial external support. Um, I think the Sandinista rebellion would probably buckle pretty quickly under pressure from heightened American support, not under heightened American military pressure, because like overtly, but as you mentioned, Chris, we would kind of, as you said, pick the winner, um, and let them do their thing. So yeah, I don't really have any objection to that.
And what we talked about, I think that kind of the World War One thing pushes up the Nicaraguan rebellion. In our timeline, it was kind of mid to late 20s. I think now we're looking at it more in the early 20s. Probably 26, I want to say, is a fair time for us to say that the United States starts pulling out. And that frees up a character to come do some stuff in the United States.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So he was kind of I do want to take a step back. I do want to say, like, this might be the story arc where we have so many of these characters that either we have very strong feelings about, or like if you're, I don't want to say in the podcast world, but one of these names that like comes up, and like people that look at this kind of stuff, they're like, I need to tell you about this guy. Sometimes there's just certain people that like
he's one of those figures that is in, as Chris said, the podcast world, well known amongst podcasters or history buffs. That in our timeline have kind of been a little bit under the radar, perfect for those like late night YouTube binging sessions where you're like, oh, who is this guy? What did he do? How did he like kind of behind the scenes impact things? Maybe in the video game world, he would be referred to as like an NPC, like he's not the main character. But he could be like a party member, in a video game, but like he's not the main character. And yet in an alternate timeline, in an alternate universe, he could end up becoming a little bit more important. And so with no further introductions, or rather prevarications necessary, we'll drop his name and talk about who he is and why he might matter a little more in this timeline. And that is Major General Smedley Butler. For anybody who listens to this show and who is, not as huge of a history enthusiast as we are, the only things that you might know about Butler for are a couple of things. Chris, what are those things we talked about in the pre-podcast?
So, and by the way, don't even pretend that I didn't like drop the name and you had to Google him.
Oh well, yeah, okay. I was gonna say yes. I was gonna bring up eventually that, like, even for me, a rather large history enthusiast, I had heard the name. I maybe knew one or two things about him from our timeline, but besides that, I had to Google him and start skimming the Wikipedia because I had no idea.
And I think one of the reasons he has this kind of role is it's so crazy what he's into, like what he does. So
I think he in our timeline especially, he pisses off a lot of the wrong people.
Yes. On every side of the issues, though. That's the amazing thing about him.
He finds a way to make no one happy.
So I think if you have come across him, it's probably because of his not to sound a little hipster about this, his later work. In terms of, he wrote a book called War is a Racket. And literally one of his quotes was, I was a hired gun for American capital. He kind of like, somehow, this is a major general in the United States Marine Corps who sounds like he's wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt. I think that's
I mean, to get even more hipster, he was like in the military industrial complex, but somehow sounded he was like at a Greenpeace rally or like in the hippies,
but
before they became a thing by 30 years.
I mean, the one thing I'm going to say is he comes about it honest, because he actually was sent to China. He was sent to Nicaragua, to Haiti, the Dominican Republic, to Cuba. He did his time all of these places, and he didn't come up with those opinions at a teach-in. He came up with those opinions having done stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say what you will about his opinions, but it wasn't an academic, I'm in an ivory tower just doing, analyzing whatever, and I'm paid to do it because I have tenure. Like, no, he actually was on the ground, and this is how he formed his opinions.
But he also did a lot of other weird interests. Like, I'm gonna throw this out there and just let Evan talk for a little bit. Philadelphia police.
Yeah. So, Butler has he's kind of Mr. Worldwide in a certain sense. He's involved with a lot of stuff all over the place, like in the Philippines and China, Honduras, Nicaragua, like all this stuff. He actually he received 2 Medal of Honors, I believe.
Yes.
Medals of Honor. Yeah. And so his first one was in Veracruz, which we mentioned, in the last episode of Woodrow Wilson. Yes, friend of the pod, getting involved in there. Charles Evan Hughes, we think would act no differently, and in fact, maybe slightly more involved in Veracruz. But so Butler gets his first Medal of Honor from that. But fast forwarding a little bit, Butler gets involved in Philadelphia, a place which is always sunny, by the way. It's always sunny in Philadelphia. Had to throw that in there. But basically during the early 1920s, Butler takes a leave of absence from the Marines, and he becomes the director of public safety in Philadelphia. And he decides
basically police commissioner.
Yeah, basically police commissioner. And he decides that the main problems, the main focus of his administration, of his tenure, has to be in treating speakeasies as like, I don't know exactly how to put it, but I guess in modern parlance, you can say that he basically treated them as like terrorist cell networks. Like, he is in there, he's busting this stuff up. He's making a big show of it.
I want to kind of throw, picture the Keystone Cops, and that's kind of what policing was before this, which was they might have a billy club. He takes over and arms the police officers with sawed-off shotguns, puts them in cars, and has them chase down bootleggers. The level of violence that he brought into Philadelphia, the level of violence this man brought into Philadelphia was remarkable.
And that's remarkable for Philadelphia standards.
There is no proof that he threw batteries at Santa Claus, but I'm not ruling this out.
I mean, I remember reading this story a few months back about how there was this robot that tried to get across North America or something, and it was able to get across Canada successfully, but it tried to do so in the United States, and where did it get ruthlessly slaughtered? It got taken apart in Philadelphia.
It had made it to Philadelphia from California.
Yeah. Right, yeah, exactly. And so Butler brings that level of just militarization, I guess you can say, of the police and during his tenure in our timeline. And eventually, I don't remember exactly how things went down. I think he had to resign, if I remember reading the Wikipedia correctly.
Well, again, he is very law and order. He is very militaristic. He's very you enforce the laws. The law he has to enforce is prohibition.
Yeah.
Which is everywhere else, almost everywhere else in the country, in almost every other major city, they're looking at this okay, it's against the law. I just did air quotes.
And in heavy air quotes, you really shouldn't do this, guys.
He took it seriously because he's the law is the law. My job is to enforce every law in the book.
Yeah. And I took that personally.
It's almost as if part of me says he might have had a different outcome if one of the laws he wasn't tasked with enforcing was prohibition.
Yeah, I could see that.
In Philadelphia.
Yeah, good luck with that. So why do we say all of this, Chris? Well, what are we implying about him in the alternate timeline?
The one other thing I want to do, let's give a complete picture of him. By the way, all of this has been our timeline. Real guy did this. Let's talk about the business plot.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
So, after kind of militarizing the police force in Philadelphia, this was mid to late 20s. He retired from the Marine Corps. This is kind of before he went on his college tour and became like openly anti-establishment, whatever. There was a plot by business leaders against FDR to basically like use disgruntled American veterans to start some riots and bring in a kind of a figurehead dictator to take over the United States and overthrow Roosevelt. Apparently, I don't know why they didn't have MacArthur's number, because this sounds like right up MacArthur's alley. However, actually, I know why they didn't do MacArthur, because no veterans would follow him after 32. And actually, we're going to get into that.
Yeah.
However, they reached out to Smedley Butler, expecting that, oh, this is Mr. Law and Order. He would absolutely be on board with this. He wasn't. He already kind of had those like feelings and those opinions about it wasn't the military industrial complex yet, but the establishment. And so when they approached him, he basically said, yeah, I'm totally on board. Hung up the phone and called like the FBI. Basically worked with them to document and infiltrate this business plot to bring as much of it to light as possible. Is that kind of fair?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary.
So many boxes this guy checks. Like from the right wing, he's Mr. Law and Order. From the left wing, he's very anti-imperialist. Like,
and I mean, let's in our timeline as well. And this is just stuff I'm reading from the Wikipedia and educating myself more on.
Sure.
But like in 1936, do you happen to know who Butler voted for in the 36 election?
Yeah.
He voted for Norman Thomas, who he was the nominee of the Socialist Party, very well known for his pacifism and, of course, his socialist economic platform. But like, this just goes to show the degree of independent streak, I guess you can say, how much Butler marches to the beat of his own drum. So what are we supposed to? Yeah, in our alternate timeline.
In the alternate timeline, taking back to there,
yeah,
he is basically the leader of U.S. involvement in Nicaragua. And he, kind of similar to our timeline, kind of decides we need to get out of here and facilitates the handover to Somoza and kind of comes back. And you always have this of like, there were a lot of people in 1952 that were trying to have an Eisenhower-MacArthur race. Like whenever the U.S. finishes a fight somewhere, you can tell. I don't know if Evan, you are old enough to remember Wesley Clark. He was an American general in Bosnia that tried to run in like 2004.
Okay.
Like when a war's over, you're gonna have a couple of generals that rose to the top and are going to.
Yeah. Now I remember when my era, because I don't remember that name, but I remember when Petraeus was floated as a name, and it was pretty seriously considered until all of that.
Colin Powell as well.
And Colin Powell, yep. I remember that. That's kind of what I was politically aware of things.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but with that being said, generals coming home and a lot of times getting involved in politics, um, where does that leave? And in terms of time frame as well, like who would be, would he be running himself? What party would he be running for? Or what do we think is ultimately going to end up happening with him in
So,
this time in the alternate timeline?
sure. So I kind of realized I did something I hate doing, which is messing up orders of things.
I was just going to say, wait, we needed to develop something first
Um,
to get him in the right position.
he is in charge in Nicaragua, 1917-ish through, call it 10 years, 1926, 27. While he's there, this is the key that I'm building up towards, and you know what? No, I'm gonna keep going, and we can come back as we need to.
Okay.
He becomes police commissioner in Philadelphia, late 20s. And in our timeline, I'm gonna pause. I'm just gonna hop over to Europe. You don't have the American Dawes Act. Here's the economic theory,
Yes,
propping
here
up
we
the
go.
German reparation banks, and it
But
happened.
let's camp on that really quick, just really, really quick. So in our timeline, and I pulled this up in the
Sure.
pre-discussion because I heard about the Dawes plan and I knew loosely what it was, but essentially just think of a pyramid scheme. That's essentially what's going on here. In our timeline, Germany had to pay war reparations to the Allies. And the problem is that they had a lot of debt. They lost, a good amount of land. They were having problems. So the United States basically said, "Hey, we have a perfect idea that is definitely not self-interested at all and will definitely not benefit us in the end. We will give you, Germany, some high interest loans to be able to pay the reparations to the Allies. We're being totally, selfless here. We're helping you out here. This won't benefit us at all. Not at all. But the Allies, in turn, Great Britain and France in particular, they had debts that they had to pay and settle with us. So really, if you look at the flow chart, we see the money that's being funneled from the US to Germany, Germany to the Allies, and then from the Allies back to the United States. If we want to talk about a big reason why the Roaring Twenties were a big deal, the Roaring Twenties as big as they were, a decent chunk of that was because of this Dawes plan, because we were receiving a lot of money that we initially loaned to Germany. So with that all in mind, then,
And then
no Dawes plan is happening in the alternate timeline, right, Chris?
right, because the United States is not interested in Europe.
Doesn't have a seat at the table. And this is the one time, Chris, you've mentioned a couple times you're going to have a single use card for a couple of words. I'm going to have a single use card for the League of Nations.
Okay.
League of Nations is not, if it either is not happening because Wilson is not around, or it is a much less of a bigger deal. But I think it's not happening because it's really Wilson's brainchild.
I agree, does not exist.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway, so moving on. So the Dawes plan isn't happening. What is happening instead?
And by the way, this is kind of a big part of what we're going to come back to. I think if we do part 4 of this, what happens when Germany starts defaulting on these loans
without American help?
Right. However, we can come back to that. What it basically means is you don't have the inflow of the outflow and inflow of capital from Europe. It's a little less of a big crash, but not to sound too much like Smedley Butler, I guess. Capitalism crashes. Like, you have a business cycle and you're going to have depressions. You're going to have another depression here. And it just because we've thrown a lot of people, and because I don't want to make Evan Google anything else. Okay, timeline wise, happens similar time frame 2029-ish, 2030. What happened in our timeline is during the Roaring Twenties, one of the things the United States government did was say, and this was historically, it had always, it reminds me a little bit of, and this may not be as big for Evan, who doesn't live in the capital, but whenever there's a government shutdown, all of the federal workers are not sure if they're going to get their back pay. And every single time it's happened, part of the deal to reopen everything is, okay, we'll give you, but it's not, they don't actually.
It's not a for sure thing.
And that actually, after every American war, Congress passes a law to give bonuses, to give retirement to service members. And this was back, again, this has been changed, GI Bill, a lot of things have happened since then. But up until then, during this American Revolution, during the War of 1812, after the Civil War, Congress had always passed a bill saying, here's something at the end of this. Here's a little, a memento of our appreciation. And in our timeline, and I think it's going to happen in this one, in 1924, the Congress passed a law saying, hey, U.S. veterans of World War I, we are going to give you a certain amount of money in, I want to say it was like 1940, 1944.
Yeah, it was somewhere around there.
None of you long service members are going to be doing anything else in 1944 other than enjoying your golden years.
Because that's definitely how things worked.
But what wound up happening again in our timeline and what happened here is when the Great Depression hits, it's a little bit like those J.G. Wentworth commercials. It's your money.
I have a structured settlement and I need cash now.
Your money goes now. Basically, yeah. Congress didn't give them the money now. It was, we'll put it aside, it'll grow, and you'll get it at maturity. And the veterans couldn't eat. So
it's like, why defer Social Security payments if you don't even believe that Social Security is going to be around by the time you can collect?
Right. So they protested, marched on Washington. And the response of the government under Hoover was tear gas and tanks. Literally.
Great just visuals in the middle of a depression.
I mean,
tear gassing our troops.
Also, think about, you mentioned a name earlier of a man named George Patton, who was here and commanded these tanks, including sending these tanks against somebody who he served with in France and had saved his life in the trenches. And here's Patton leading tanks against him. So
I'll save your life if it comes to combat in France, but if you want your money, I'm right. Like hitting the change teams button. Right. Like I'm leading the tanks against you.
So, okay, fine. You asked an interesting question, and we'll see how deep we want to get into this.
Yeah.
Is this still an issue if the U.S. didn't fight in France?
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about this in the pre-podcast because initially my thought was, wait, would this still happen? Because, these are mainly the agitators in our timeline, the ones who are wanting this money, this bonus money early, are World War I veterans for the most part. And so
exclusively, these only apply to World War I veterans. Civil War and Spanish American already had theirs.
Cool. Perfect. So just make sure I got the time frame right there. But so if there is no heavy American involvement in World War I, then in the pre-podcast, I was like, well, then would this still be an issue? Would this still happen? And we, of course, have to remember that what we've constructed in the alternate timeline is we still have a conflict that the United States is involved with during the years of World War I. And it's kind of, we can loosely group this as part of World War I. because of the Germans, sending the telegram and everything. It's just a different theater. Counterinsurgency in Nicaragua, if we assume, is going to be a bigger deal for the U.S. military, something that is going to be an active combat situation more than it is in our timeline. We're gonna have veterans that come from that have served in an active duty, active combat situation. So the short answer is that yes, we are going to be seeing a bonus army, not from the battlefields of France, but from the jungles of Nicaragua. And Chris, I think you argued that it would probably be an even bigger deal than what happened in our timeline.
Just primarily because the way the military is structured, when we go to one of these excursions, as they are apparently now being called, whenever we go to war without declaring war, the army always runs into the issue of, World War II, we drafted people till the end. Once you were in the military until the war was over. That's not normally how it works. Evan talked a little bit about the Valley Forge scenario of all of these militiamen's enlistments were about to be up. In other conflicts like the United States and Vietnam, when you were drafted for 4 years because we weren't actually at war in Vietnam. And so you did like so much time in reserve, so much time in active, and then you would come home and be in inactive reserve. So you only had like a year, what was called in country. And if we're in a situation similar to that in Nicaragua, we talked about going in like 17 and it ending up almost 10 years later. You're just going to have a churn of people going through there instead of kind of what we did in Europe, which was have 4-ish months of actual fighting.
Actual American involvement. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think what we can basically say is that even if, I would say there were going to be more troops in a shorter amount of time, like comparison-wise,
right,
with American involvement in World War I in our timeline. But in the alternate timeline, we might have like less troops like that are actively involved in any given moment, but it's over a longer time frame, a longer period of time. So in the end, we're going to ultimately be having more of these troops that are going to be eligible for and promised, these bonuses. So the bonus army is going to be a bigger deal in the alternate timeline as a result.
Right.
Yes.
Understand.
And in both our timeline and the alternate timeline that we're constructing, Smedley Butler becomes a very prominent voice, a very prominent force for the bonus army.
Mm-hmm.
And he becomes a rallying figure. And he really, 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 like I said earlier, he pisses off all the right and wrong people. He just kind of makes you piss off everybody. He really gets under the skin of Hoover. Very much so.
Do you want to share the Mussolini thing?
Yes, I'll talk about
great.
that. Yeah, because that is amazing. So
way, our timeline.
Right, we're popping back to our timeline here.
We're not making this happen.
No, like this, we're not making this up. This actually happened. So Butler, he spends a little bit of time in China after, and this is an obligatory mention here as well. Everybody who was anybody in the Marine Corps at this point spent some degree of time in San Diego, my hometown. So Butler takes a stop after Philadelphia in San Diego. Then he goes around in China, and he, from what I understand, and Chris, you can fill in this part of the story a little bit more, because I'm relying on a Wikipedia level knowledge of this situation. But Butler heard gossip in like the early 30s about Mussolini, the dictator in Italy. He supposedly hit and run a child, and Butler, and this is something I mentioned in the pre-podcast as well. Generals, people in the military, a lot of times, like we can end up, they end up in politics, or they can end up in like diplomacy roles or diplomatic roles and missions. And no disrespect at all meant for the brave men and women who serve in our armed forces, but the skill set that makes you do well in the military and serving in active combat roles and situations might give you a lot of world knowledge, but it might not necessarily those skills are not necessarily as transferable over to diplomatic missions. And knowing when to speak your mind and represent the United States and its interests versus when to, well, be diplomatic and keep a tight lid on certain information or route things into proper channels. So Butler basically just comes out and he publicly talks about this. He's like, yeah, did you hear the story about Mussolini going and hitting this child? Mussolini's Chappaquiddick moment. Slightly different circumstances there, but I'm just using a famous instance of an American politician being involved in some sort of horrible car accident to make my point.
I mean, the throwback to kind of the episode we released earlier, Kennedy's not believing in anything other than themselves. Say what you will about the tenets of Italian fascism, but at least it's an ethos.
Yeah, there you go. Words I didn't expect to hear come from Chris's mouth. But be that as it may, Hoover already doesn't like Butler, especially because of his involvement with the Bonus Army stuff. Mm-hmm. But at this point,
Bonus Army hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened at this point. He already doesn't like him just for a lot of reasons. But now the Italian government is pretty upset, and so Hoover, he gets his Secretary of the Navy to court-martial Butler over this incident. And Butler, essentially, from my understanding, gets off with a slap on the wrist, after writing a very strongly worded, very sincere, from the heart apology. I hope you can detect my sarcasm there. But yeah, this incident, I think, really is another piece of the puzzle that just kind of helps Butler become a thorn in Hoover's side. And I'm not going to say is the motivation, but it certainly was a motivation for him being involved with Bonus Army shenanigans and activities. So, okay, Chris, why did you want me to recount that story? Besides it being funny.
It's hilarious, and it's great about him. But it gets to kind of what we're going to get to with why he's not exactly the best politician.
Right. But I think it also does set us up well for where we think Butler ends up in this alternate timeline. And that is he can attract for all of his, demerits as a political figure. He does happen to be in the right place at the right time in the alternate timeline, catches that lightning in a bottle, so to speak, and attracts the attention of a certain ascendant Democratic politician by the name of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And as we've noted in the previous episodes, Charles Evan Hughes winning in 1916 extends the Democrats' losing streak on the national, presidential political level. And we don't think anything changes through the 1920s in terms of Democrats' national political fortunes. Republicans continue their domination of the White House. Congress might be a little different, but just in terms of who's actually the one in the Oval Office, Chris and I see Republicans continue the winning streak, but eventually political gravity is going to catch up.
Well, I do want to kind of point out, I mean, if you look at the math on that, 1916 to 32, that's, we talked about, that's kind of the business cycle. That's kind of the political cycle of like 10, 12 years is about as 16 is about as long as you can expect to stay in power as an American political party.
Before the pendulum shifts back.
Even looking, before this, like Wilson did win in 1912. He lost in 16, but like before that, it was, the same cycle until Grover Cleveland and et cetera.
Right. Well, and to be clear, the alternate timeline.
Right.
Yeah. He wins in 12, loses in 16. And so with all that being said, we happen to think that Butler is perfectly positioned to have some sort of senior administration role in the FDR presidency. And to be more specific and not be around the bush anymore, we think he's in the right place, right time to actually be given the vice presidential nomination in 1932.
Yes. The one thing I want to say is this: like, Roosevelt's vice president in 1932 was a man named John Nance Gardner, who we've done a lot of work with before.
Yep. Dylan and I talked about him.
I don't think like that was only one arc, so I don't think he's quite a friend of the pod yet.
No, and we don't have the same love for him that we have for other friends of the pod, like Wilson and
William
Walker. Yes.
The one thing I'm going to say is John Nance Gardner, in our timeline, described the vice presidency as not worth a warm cup of spit. That is what FDR's first actual vice president said of the position. So I think there's an argument to be made that FDR, who everybody said was a master politician, looks at the situation, looks at Smedley Butler, who is hated by his opponent, Hoover, is loved by this massive group of American veterans out there, may not be the best political operative, but says vice presidency is the best possible place for you because you're on my ticket, you're going to bring in these votes, and then I'm just going to shuffle you off and see how you do with the United States Senate. That'll be fun to watch. C-SPAN radio might actually be worth listening to if Butler's president of the Senate.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is that, like, in our timeline, what we described in the pre-podcast is Butler was added to the business plot, the plot to overthrow Roosevelt and lead like basically a fascist takeover of America. But he basically was like an insider. He was a mole. Like that's what he ended up being. So he was added to give like legitimacy and an air of credence to this, or lend credence to this plot. What the plot leaders didn't really know is that he was actually more than happy to do this because he was really working for the other team. He was working for the other side. And so of course all of this happens, in our timeline. It would definitely not happen in the alternate timeline because, well, he's going to be vice president, or would be being considered vice president at this point. But with that important change, and with what you just set up, Chris, is, in our timeline, Gardner says the vice president isn't worth anything. Do we think that a personality like Butler is going to fulfill FDR's hopes and just be a nice, quiet vice president who will cast deciding votes in a Senate should they need be? We can say this in a positive sense and a negative sense.
Roosevelt has a massive majority in both parts.
Exactly. And so that's why I said probably not going to really be needed because
that's not going to be needed. But man, not to get too into modern politics, but the best way I can picture this is kind of the memes that were coming out in the Obama presidency of them like having Joe Biden go wash his T-bird in the drive. It was an Onion headline. I'm sure you're laughing. Like, just find it with crazy Uncle Joe Biden to go do to keep him out of like gaffes, because that is what that is kind of what Butler is going to be doing.
Kind of the energy that he's going to bring. And Chris, I think you did have some interesting things to say about, like, because there's no Department of Veterans Affairs yet or anything like that. But you did have an interesting point about how, like, FDR with the Civilian Conservation Corps and everything, he can give these little pet projects and these little side things to the vice president to kind of help oversee and do. There's going to be a little bit more of an emphasis on veterans affairs and things of that nature. But what do we see? And we've been heavily alluding to this now for a while. what do we see as the main difference between a Gardner vice presidency and a Butler vice presidency? Besides gas and the Thunderbird.
Sure. If I would say the difference is going to be this. One, just to talk about the Civilian Conservation Corps, kind of a it was a U.S. military program to build national parks and all these things, because the military knows how to move people around, how to build tents, how to keep people like in an area and doing something. And I think that was a great idea. It was implemented, I want to say, a little bit later under Roosevelt. You saw it a little bit. You really saw a lot of people cutting their teeth there that are later going to be doing things in World War II. That comes to the fore a lot sooner. The other thing is this. In the alternate podcasting world, I guess is the best way to put it. In whatever alternate timeline this creates, and trust me, I am not going to actually paint this picture. When you have somebody like doing an alternate history podcast in the alternate history world, you don't have to Google who Smedley Butler is.
Right.
You know.
Right. Exactly. This reminds me of the discussion I posted on the Discord the other day, where I'm like, okay, can we reverse engineer like the real timeline from an alternate timeline standpoint? And that's what I was asking about with the Kennedy episodes. I'm like, would we have been able to predict the Kennedy assassination? Probably not. Mm-hmm. So so Chris, you're kind of tapping into that energy, and I love that.
But yeah, I think that's kind of a good place to end here. We don't know what he's gonna say, but he's gonna say something.
Well, he's gonna say and do something. And so to lead up to what we think is going to actually happen, FDR has 3 vice presidents in our timeline. We have John Nance Gardner, and then Henry Wallace.
It's not because of the polio, but the man changed vice president more than he changed his socks.
Yeah, exactly. Then he has Henry Wallace, and the last vice president that he has, famously, is Harry Truman, who ends up taking over, the waning months of World War II. Well, in the alternate timeline, we don't think that Butler sticks around even until like a second term, because we have the change in FDR's third term in our timeline. In the alternate timeline, we'll have one more sock change. We'll have someone else come to prominence.
I actually do have to say, I think actually in 36, it might be Gardner, just because of that escalated quickly. Let's pick somebody who actually will just sit there like a warm cup of steak.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Yeah. FDR's like, you know what? I think I need someone who's a little bit more quiet and malleable. So there you go. That's an interesting possibility for sure. All right. Well, I think I do, before we fully end things off, I think let's return back to Nicaragua just briefly, because sure. I think we tied up the bow pretty nicely on where we see things going in terms of American politics. Great Depression's still going to happen. It's not going to have the same sort of Germany defaulting on loans, the whole like Dawes Plan cycle, but because of the business cycle, this is eventually going to happen in some form or fashion, maybe with a little bit of a less interconnected world, but it's still going to happen. The Roaring '20s are eventually going to come to an end. FDR is going to come in. So I think we set that up really nicely. But in terms of Nicaragua, the place where all of this began, where do we see things moving forward from here? Because I do think it's interesting contemplating a world where, American involvement is still fairly heavy. It's still, pretty covert. And so do we see, like, in the long term, like this sort of like Sandinista legacy, arising, or do we see a more, I guess you can say, compliant, like Nicaraguan government, which could have it lasting longer, which I think that has kind of interesting downstream effects for like American foreign policy, moving forward, especially in like World War II, Cold War era, all that kind of good stuff. Chris, right. You had the one-time use of the Contra card. I'm going to use my one-time use of the Contra card as well. But yeah, like the Iran-Contra affair, all that. What do you think about that, Chris?
So I think first and foremost, the interesting thing is one, the way we ended the Nicaraguan insurgency in this alternate timeline is us propping up Anastasio Somoza.
Right.
I think through the 36, he's fine. He is still our guy there. The other interesting thing is, I think right around this time, one of the reasons that Somoza came to power in our timeline is what was called the good neighbor policy, which was kind of the first time that the United States pulled back from Latin America and tried to kind of let them like do independent country stuff. I don't think that happens in this timeline. What I think, so you do have Somoza as like the American puppet. And I do think there is more of the memory of Sandino in Nicaragua. But the issue is that there is nobody actually supporting it or pushing anything on Somoza. So what I could see is maybe in like the 50s and 60s, we're talking about the Sandinistas in Nicaragua as opposed to Arbenz in Guatemala or Castro in Cuba. I think that might be a really interesting place that those will show up.
I think I would tend to agree with that, because I think, and this is like kind of getting way, this is, we're inserting this at the end of the episode because it's just going to be a passing thought. Like, this isn't something that we're going to expand on a ton, but like, I can see because,
by the way, here's the other thing that I kind of want to hesitate to say, because hey, there's a lot of other stuff that's about to be happening elsewhere that kind of sets up other nations to actually step into Latin America and support anti-American causes.
Right, exactly. And so this is why I kind of hesitate saying this, because, there's a lot of stuff that, if we do part 4, we can talk about with what happens differently in Europe, for sure. But just thinking from like a broad level overview, like I can see, as you just said, Chris, like instead of it, or maybe being a little more prominent than like Cuba, for example, I can totally see, like, we'll just call the Soviets, right, in our alternate timeline, whoever, wherever they are. I can totally see that being a place or country where they would want to more strongly support, anti-American insurgency, anti-American interests. For sure.
Both because it's a very fertile ground and because it is a huge target.
Well, yeah, because now we got an extremely important waterway there.
Exactly.
100%. So, yeah, I think I agree with that. And I think that's about as good a place as any to leave things off for a possible next episode. But anyway, guys, this has been a wrap on part 3 of the Nicaragua Canal. And if you enjoyed this, if you have any additional thoughts, things that we might have missed, or things that you agree with, disagree with, most all of the great discussion that we have goes on our Discord. So feel free to join in on the fun there. And I think that just leaves us with one very important question, Chris. And I'm bracing myself on what's going to happen here, because I'm sure you've had an entire episode to think about this. But if we come across a fork in time, what do you think we should do with that?
Get chased down one of the forks by a shotgun-wielding Philadelphia police officer.
Yes, I love that. I absolutely love that. The way that the phrase typically goes is, if you see a fork in time, take it.
Don't even say typically. Typically is like what we do if I haven't come up with something like that. Or Dylan also does a lot of work on
Dylan
that.
does a lot of that stuff too. I won't say typically anymore, because typically it's something else. I'll say traditionally. Traditionally, that's how it ends. In homage to the famous quote from Yogi Berra. But guys, and gals, thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.